Alright, I'm going to preface this upcoming video here by saying that it is going to be a very lengthy video, so feel free to skip through any parts that you don't want to watch or anything like that. But this is the new FX2 series mixer. I'm going to cover a lot of differences between the first generation and second generation, how I use it for my own purposes, and if there's anything that I missed that you guys would like to see, because right now Peavey just has the first generation videos up here on YouTube, and while that helps the second generation, there has been quite a few improvements to it, which I'll cover. And just let me know in the comments down below if there's any piece of functionality or questions about it that you might have, and I'll do my best to answer it, and if I can, I'll make a video showing the demonstrating that function as well. So without further ado, here's my review of the new FX Series 2 mixer. Hey guys, Xboxer here. And today's video, I'm actually doing an update video from a video I did a while back, actually when I first started my YouTube channel. This is my updated mixer and rack effects that I use for when I'm playing in a live band, and you might notice some similarities, and you will probably notice the most glaring difference right here is the FX Series 2. This is their second generation from Peavey. My previous video had this had the first generation, and I'll go over some of the major differences and some key differences as well. I know that the first generation I had for about 5 years I had no problems with, and the first generation, while it's been around for a long time and it did suffer from limitations as far as the digital section is concerned, but overall, I mean, it's a great analog mixer. It fits in a rack. It's rack mountable, as you can see, and this one definitely does look a lot larger, being that they've upgraded the faders from 75 millimeters to 100. So this is where you're getting the extra space. It takes up 12 rack spaces instead of 10, which is the first generation, and that's pretty much one of the major differences you're going to notice off the bat. And then I still have the same rack processing effects here. I have the QF131 bands here, and a 2x15 aux 1, 2, 3, and 4. The feedback ferret is above here. The mixer, the output of the aux sends go from the mixer to the equalizers first, and then it goes to the feedback ferret. And the reason I do it that way is this has a feedback location system, which I showed in my previous video how I use those. And really, you really should be ringing out the monitors with your EQ first before you can really rely on the feedback ferret more as a panic mode. And that's essentially how I have it set up. Now the 2x15s I don't really use too often. For my band purposes, I've never needed more than 2 monitors, but I do have the ability to run actually 6 monitor sends specifically. You have the first 4 here, which are pre-fader. It's they're set up before the fader, and then you have your 2 right here, which they're post-fader. So if you move this around, it's going to change the volume to these buses here. And these are also combinations. If you're not using the effects, you can either use FX1, FX2, or these are also aux 5 and aux 6. So moving on from the rack, this is my PA system setup, which is right now in my house at the moment, in between bands. So brought all my equipment back home and had a couple house parties with it and been running it. It's pretty damn loud, as you might imagine, but we usually have a house party here every couple weeks or so. Have some of the guys over, drink beer. It's a lot of fun. But this is the Peavey SP2. Tops here with a 15-inch woofer and then a compression driver horn on top. It's I think, well, actually it's got it right here. It's 1,000 watts peak, 1,000 watts program, 2,000 watts peak. It's built like an Abrams tank, and never had any issues with it. I actually got these on discount when a store was going out of business, and they were renting this this set of SP2s out for parties and various occasions. They would rent it out to various customers, but they were in really good shape. Made them an offer and pretty much got 2 of them for the price of 1, really, and was very happy with the overall results. And took me a little bit more time, but since this is the gray grill edition, they've actually updated some of the SP2 series has been around for many years for Peavey, and this just happens to be the previous generation, the gray grill. Still the same power rating as the new one, just some cosmetic changes here. And now it took me a little bit longer to find the double 18s here. They're actually single 18s here, but they're in separate boxes. So again, the same SP series. Each of these I think are 600 watts continuous, and then I think 1200 watts program, I believe. Really, really powerful subwoofers. It took me a while to find them. Guitar Center and a couple other different music stores. I had one of them come in from Iowa, had it shipped to me for a decent cost, and the other one here I think came from Illinois. Again, you know, I went to great lengths to make this a complete set, because when you're mixing and matching drivers for your PA system, you really need to have some know-how how to like different frequency responses and things of that nature, which is kind of out of the scope of this video. But suffice to say, I kept it everything in the same series, and worked. It sounds really good. Now, as far as amplifiers go, kept it still pretty basic. I got the Peavey 3800. It's their standard AB, Class AB design amplifier. It's got a very heavy toroid transformer, if you can see through there. This is the heaviest of the amplifiers. I think this weighs about 45-50 pounds. And then, you know, this is, I forget exactly what the specs are. I mean, you can look it up if you want. But this runs the subwoofers, 118 for each channel. And up here is their special bi-pack power amplifier. This, I bought two of them because this one operates the left and this one operates the right, because I wanted stereo. But the way that these things are set up is the SP2 series allows you to bi-amp their drivers, meaning that you can have a separate amplifier running the woofer and a separate amplifier running the horn here. And normally you can get their Peavey's version of the drive rack out there, and I think it's called the VSX series of processors. But I opted for something a little bit more simple. This low frequency here operates the horn. I'm sorry, operates the woofer here, and then the high frequency operates the horn. It's already got an internal built-in crossover already, and you know, it only does mono. You could run both SP2s off of one amplifier and it would just be mono, but the reason I got the second one is for stereo. Most of the time for live bands, I don't even use this amp. I just have it as a backup, because you never know when you might need a backup. It's kind of ungodly to move, because you're looking at about 120 pounds of amplifier here. But then again, you know, I've never had any of these amplifiers shut down on me during a gig. It's probably middle of the road as far as power handling that can handle this PA system. Never had any issues, as I mentioned. Some guys actually want to go a little bit more powerful on the wattage, and then use a limiter that's built into the mixer so you don't blow out your horns and drivers. But this was the best of both worlds, and plus I'm not needing that much power anyway. So some of the key differences about the FX Series 2 mixers I'm going to start off with right here. Now again, I had mentioned that they have, the second generation has 100mm throw faders now. The first generation only had 75. The second generation is 12 rack spaces tall, and the first generation was 10. So it is much larger. They also added a lamp, like a little gooseneck lamp BNC connector right here, which I think is a really good idea to have. First generation didn't have that. First generation only had a fixed 80 hertz low cut. The second generation here has a variable low cut on, say, from 20 hertz all the way up to 300. And let's see if I can focus in a little bit about it. There we go. So you can change the dial as you need, and still has a semi-parametric. Yeah, I believe that's the term, right? It's got a variable mid shift. I'm sorry, and it's not a parametric. You have a low cut boost, and then a middle cut and boost here. Then you have a variable Q, center frequency that you can set for the mids here, anywhere from 100 hertz all the way up to 5K. And then of course you got your highs right here, and then your gain is right here. Now, still have the ability to run 6 auxiliary sends. The first 4 here are pre-fader, and then these 2 right here are post-fader. And I do believe that you still have the ability to take these 4 and you can internally change the jumpers to make it post-fader. I don't know why would you want to do that. There are some applications where it makes sense, but for my purposes I like pre-fader. Now these are your aux 5 and aux 6. Now these are also your effects buses, so if you're not using them as an aux, you can actually use them as an effects. This has a bank of 2 effects here, which I'll cover in about a minute or so. So Peavey did a lot of upgrades internally with this second generation here. The first generation had a mains output failure. It turned out to be one of the codec daughter boards that ran the DSP engine for the effects. So the analog side was fine, but once the signals got routed to the digital section, there's quite a few pieces of the digital section, which I'll cover in a few minutes, that went through this daughter board, and there was a voltage issue, and it would actually be covered under warranty. It was a simple fix once they did it, and it only affected certain parts of the first generation, and you can get it fixed by Peavey, no problem. But that was really the only major problem with the digital section. The other thing too with the digital section of the first generation is that it really didn't have a lot of power. You were limited to the types of reverbs and effects that you can use. The output processing, you had your feedback ferret, which is right here. It only affects the main outputs left and right. The feedback ferret is a really good tool to have, especially on the mains, and I'll cover that in a few minutes. But then you got your parametric EQ, and then you can also have a graphic EQ here. You can select between the two. Another issue was that for the first generation, you heard a little bit of they had a noise gate that was built into the software on the first generation, and especially when you're just using it for vocals, and if you weren't running any like background music, you actually hear a thumping sound when you had the parametric EQ activated. They've since fixed that. You no longer hear that, so that was something that was corrected in the second generation. Another piece here, if you go through the type, there's a delay, which Peavey has some good videos on how this on the output delay is. Think of your backline. Your backline is going to be delayed a few seconds before the PA fires, so this allows it to fire at the same time. Some of those features are really good, and of course you have a dynamics aspect here where you can set your limiter so you don't blow out your amplifier or speakers. As I mentioned with the first generation, it had a little bit of a problem with multitasking, and I'm trying to focus in on it a little bit better. You do have the ability to record to the left and right main outs to the memory stick, or in this case now the second generation can now do it directly to the computer. And all the firmware updates, which this is my current version 1.13, the first generation had a problem with various memory sticks, and I say memory stick as a loose term. I say USB jump drive. It's got on the back here, if you can see it, it's still got the same exact locations. You got the one for your memory stick and then a USB-B type in order to plug into the computer to stream the left and right channels directly to your computer, kind of like a 2-channel sound card. Unfortunately, the first generation had a limitation on multitasking. If you had 2 reverbs going, or if you had a reverb and you had other effects and a feedback ferret running and all the other output processing here, you would have to go to the digital in and out section, and then you would see a CPU usage meter, and sometimes when you get up to 99% there, you wouldn't be able to record to a memory stick and then run all the other effects at the same time. The second generation has fixed that. Now you no longer have the usage meter. It can now do everything all at once and without any major issues at all. Now, one of the other minor things that they changed for the digital section, well, now you are able to run 2 enhanced reverbs on each of the banks here, which I think is a really good feature, especially if you want to have an enhanced reverb for your vocalists. And then on the second bank here, you can set up a different reverb for your drum set, for example. Now, the first generation, you were able to, if I were to go into the first bank here, you used to have 3. You can put a different effects, and you can do like a compressor and then a reverb at the end. And then if you wanted, there was a third one that was available in the first generation. Now they've reduced it down to 2, but that still isn't terrible, because for the amount of patches that you're going to make and what you're going to use, like I usually use, and I don't know if I have, I think I have one somewhere in here, up to 51. No, I think I might have gotten rid of it here. But what you basically have here is you can go through the different, I'll use my other hand here. You can go through the different user presets here. You know, you got, these are all the different reverbs, you know, acoustic guitar, brass, snare, strings. Here's some of the vocal ones I use, like Vocal Air is a very nice, it's a light reverb. I use that for the vocalist a lot if I want something like a slapback. You get something like a vocal plate or a vocal huge. Those are some of the reverbs that I like to use. You know, it's nothing out of the ordinary. You know, something. Try to keep it very simple. The effects ability of this mixer is quite capable. Now with the second, now you have, as I mentioned, you have two banks, 1 and 2. Now the second effects bank, we're just going to go down here for a second. Now you can route the effects if you have, say, if I have a, you know, select the vocal club. That's a type of reverb. You have to route it through the left and right channels to go through the mains. Now, if you wanted to have that reverb on your monitor mixes, you'd have to send it to, you can only send it to aux 1 and aux 2 respectively. I've never really needed this. If anything, you want to hear yourself nice and clean and dry through the monitors. Again, people have different preferences on how they set it up, but you can route that particular effect to the aux send buses right here. Here's your master aux buses here. This is the main volume for it. As you make your selections here, like I may want to go and have the main vocalist run through the 2 top monitors, but have nothing of, say, like if the rest of it is drums, and then you have bass and a guitar at the end here, that you're probably not going to have any of that going through any of the buses. You're just going to have vocals and maybe a little bit of drums going through the first 2 and maybe 3 and 4 if you have it set up. But that's essentially how you have the internal effects routed. Now, a special case with the second bank here, if you look here, this is the insert and the patch. What you have here, you can select between using the second bank of the internal effects here, which is routed through this bus right here. But if you didn't want to route it internally, and say if you wanted to use this effects bus and just have it for one specific channel, and then you can adjust the features here, then I'll show you how to do it in the back there. Basically what you would have to do here is that you would have to depress this button, and now it's no longer being routed internally on this bus. There is a patch one right here, if I can get a good picture of it, sorry guys. You put a tip ring sleeve here, and then any of the insert lines here, which I'll see if I can try and get rid of the problem here. So look at this top row is your tip ring sleeve insert channels for each of the channels here, channel strips, except for these stereo channels, which those are special exceptions here I'll talk about in a minute. But you would, if you wanted to just do it right on the channel 1 for vocals, you just wanted to have, say, a compressor or a de-esser effect, for example, just on the lead vocals, then you take that tip ring sleeve to tip ring sleeve and you put it into the insert, and then you can independently control for that one channel this particular effects bank. Okay, moving on to the memory stick recording ability. Now, the misconception with both the first generation and even somewhat with the second generation is that when you are recording onto a memory stick, or if you're sending it out to your computer, it's only going to output the two main channels, the left and the right. It's not a multi-track export function, meaning that you're going to have a separate MP3 or file, or a separate file made for channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, and you're going to have 12 separate tracks streaming through the USB. It does not work that way, and if it did work that way, this mixer would not be sold at the price that it's sold at. That's quite a large investment of technology to kind of cram inside 16-channel rack-mounted effects mixer here. But what you do is have the main left and right channels recorded onto the memory stick, or you can even have it mono if you wanted to. Now, the first generation had one thing that everyone needs to understand. With the first generation of FX mixers, this mixer was designed and built when the largest USB jump drive you can get was 512 megabytes there, and I actually have one of those older jump drives. I've had it since for many years now, and hasn't given me any issues. So I still use it to this day, but I have like larger ones, like I have a 2 gigabyte and then a 4 gigabyte somewhere lying around my house. But the first generation had a limitation on the size of the jump drive and also on certain brands. Like that's a SanDisk. I know that the first generation had trouble reading jump drives unless you had some beta firmware installed in this to read the larger jump drives. You no longer have that limitation with the second generation. I think I put a 16 gigabyte one of the jump drives was 16 gigabytes here, and it had no problem reading it whatsoever. So now what you do is if you have any type of media plugged in on this, I don't know what I got here. So what you do is you go press the digital in and out, and let's see. Sorry, that's looking a little blurry here. It's probably just the glare from the camera here. Basically, you have memory stick, computer, and utility. So if I go to memory stick, it'll give you a warning. Don't have the memory stick and your computer USB connected at the same time. That's basically what it says. And sorry, guys, it's not letting me focus in too well on this. But basically, you have MP3 playback settings, record and record settings. I do have some media on here that you can play or you can record. Now, another thing to mention is that the first generation had a sample rate problem. It would record at, I believe it was 48K, but if you had a sample if you had like an MP3 that was at 4100, 44.1K was the sample rate. When it played back, it actually had it had a speed problem, basically. It sounded like the song was slower than what it should, so it wasn't able to translate that very well, and they didn't have a fix for it on the firmware, so that was a limitation that you had. This now, the second generation has corrected for that, so it doesn't matter if you have a 44.1K or a 48K sample rate MP3. Also, the MP3 quality of the bits per second, I think it was 192 bits per second for the MP3 for the first generation. You know, and that's a pretty good, decent quality MP3. But now the second generation, if I go to record settings here, you should be able to do, see what you have here. You can adjust your gain. And the gain goes to how loud it's going to be recording onto the MP3, onto the jump drive there. And then you can set your quality. Right now, they used to have it was just stereo 192 kilobits per second. Now you bump that up to a stereo file consistent encoding to 320 kilobits per second, which that's the highest quality MP3 that you can get. Now this next bit is going to be only specific for the people who actually have the first generation FX series mixers and how it relates to them and how the new second generation works. The patches that I had mentioned before, which you can make with your effects here. It's like right here you can make, if I wanted to save this one as, you know, as a reverb and a compressor or a de-esser or anything like that, I'm going to want to name it. Now, the first generation, you were able to store this information, but you were not able, say if you had to do a factory reset for whatever reason that you were having trouble with the digital section, or you just wanted to reset the whole settings, you would lose all your patches in the first generation, and there was no way to save them. You couldn't back it up to a disk or anything like that. Peavey on the second generation here has they heard the outcries from the customer base there, and now you have that ability to save those user settings, save those patches that you make. So you go to digital section here, you go to select utility, and then user settings, and then you can either save the current user settings that you have, or you can load it from a disk or from your computer. Now you can save those settings, and you will never have to re-enter them again, especially after a firmware update, for example. Pretty much you have your restore factory settings, you have a password ability so no one screws the pooch on during a gig, which I don't really need that. And security settings, this has something to do with that too. Screen adjustment, you know, it's just the positioning here. And really that was one of the main things that I know a lot of people were questioning about the second generation. Yes, you do have the ability to save the digital the patches and any of your settings, like your feedback ferret, your delays, your dynamic settings, your parametric EQs, graphic EQs, whatever you're using. All those settings could be easily saved to a file that's saved on the jump drive or your computer, and you can reload it anytime you need it. So the effects routing is pretty straightforward. I'm not really going to cover too much more in depth of how that goes, but this is a really good versatile mixer of what you want to use here. Now, again, this has it's a 4 subgroup here. You know, I use the subgroups when I have 5 or 6 drums plugged in. I think normally the drummers that I've played with have usually either 6 or 8 mics. We usually don't mic the overheads, but to be able to have 8 of those mics and then you can control it with 1 or 2 faders is a hell of a lot better, especially when you're trying to adjust the volume on the fly. Again, this has global phantom power. It's 48 volt, so either you turn it on for all the channels, or you turn it, or you keep it off. Now, in this price range for this particular mixer, I would expect global phantom power. Some of the more expensive mixers will have individual phantom power for each channel. You know, while that is more convenient, it really doesn't make a difference to me. The only condenser microphones that I would power is the 2 overheads for the drums. So one more feature that I wanted to cover is the aux-fed subs. Now, when I have the full band set up here, I don't really want to have vocals going through the subwoofers. Right now, the way that I have it set up for just the for playing music back, my little sub mixer, my Peavey 6 mixer, the input or the output out of this will go to the subwoofer amplifier right here. And then their daisy chain, this has a 100 hertz low pass filter for this amplifier, and then the high pass will go to the Peavey 1600s respectively. And now for aux-fed subs, what I would do is I would keep these, this would be the main left and right, for example, and then the subwoofer output would actually go to aux6, and I'll show you how I do that. So what you see in the back here is where the aux send buses are. Right below here is aux6 and aux5. Now, these are all balanced hip ring sleeve. They're electronically balanced. And that really is helpful, especially when you're trying to patch different pieces of equipment in. But what I would want to do is I have this adapter here. It's basically a tip ring sleeve 1/4 inch to a male XLR, and I would put that into aux6 right here. Now what happens with aux6 is, well, first I should say, is that now this becomes, this would be the output going out to the subwoofer, directly just to the subwoofer out. I'm running the subwoofers now in mono, no longer in stereo. So as a result, if I wanted to use, now that's plugged in to aux6, I would then take this secondary, now as I mentioned, aux6 and FX2 are one and the same bus here. So what you would have to do is now your internal effects for the second bank here, I would then turn on the patch and then patch it through to either an individual channel, or in this case, since I have multiple vocalists at any given time during the band, I can then patch the second bank of effects here to a subgroup, for example. So if I patch all the like say if I have 3 or 4, let's say if I have the first 4 channels that are specifically for vocals here, you know, I set my EQ, set my gain, do all that what I need to do. But as far as, you know, the processing from the individual channels, then it goes to, say, subgroup 1, I can then route it here specifically to left and the right channels, the main outputs, and the patch for the second bank is now patched to this subgroup number 1. Now I have an ability to take all 4 of these vocals once I get the right mix. Say, you know, obviously the lead vocalist is going to be higher up, and then us, the 3 other guys are going to do backup. They're maybe down here a little bit, for example. But now I can adjust that mix with just 1 fader, and I have, say, a reverb and a compression built onto that second bank, and it goes to this subgroup here. Now I have a good way of limiting the vocals, making sure the peaks don't, and the dynamic limiter keeps that in check with the compressor effect that I have in the second bank, and I can adjust 4 of those faders with 1 fader. So getting back to the aux-fed sub aspect, so now what I've done is this is now patched into the subgroup, which means that the effects are running there, and now this frees up this lower bus right here. Now this bus is now the aux6. So I can easily, I can prevent the vocals from the bottom here, the first 4 vocals, from even ever going into the subwoofer to begin with. Now, as I mentioned, these are post faders, so whatever the setting of the faders here is what's going to denote how much of a gain is going to this to these 2 buses right here. So I can keep the vocals completely out of the subwoofer, but then if I have, say, a kick drum or I have the bass guitar here, I'm definitely going to want to have those routed through the subwoofer. And what you would normally want to do first, especially when it comes to the kick drum and the bass guitar, for example, you're going to want to have you're going to still want to hear some of the clicking of the strings or some of the character from the bass guitar, and you're going to adjust that, on your fader accordingly. But you're not going to have all that low frequency going directly to your tops anymore. So you'll get all the character of the sound coming out of the SP2s, for example, and then all the extra thumping you can individually control with this bus right here. You can have it as present or as not present as you want in the subwoofers, but you still get the overall sound. And a lot of people don't use the aux-fed subs very much, although I think it's a very good way to set up sound here, especially if you're running subwoofers too. It just allows you more control over the overall mix of the band as you're playing. And now, most guys that I've seen will never even go this far. They'll just get an 8-channel mixer that's only, like, say, rated at 500 watts, maybe 600 watts, and that's pretty much it. They'll route everything through there on a little bit of kick and have the kick drum and the bass guitar even go through the tops. Now, the problem with that is these are not good low-frequency cabinets. The 18s are much better capable of, reproducing those bass guitar and the kick drum frequencies. You might get a little bit of a thump through these top speakers here, but you're using up some very precious headroom in both your amplifiers and your mixer here by sending those 2 instruments through the tops, and it allows better utilization of the power and what you have available. And these are very clear sounding cabinets once you get it tuned right. And finally, just wanted to mention the stereo channels. Now, this is, even though it's a 16 FX2, it is technically 16 channels, but from a channel strip perspective, it's only 12, just like the first generation. And Peavey does it, every other company out there does it. You can't really blame them specifically for it. But if you look at the stereo channels here, you have a choice. You can either, so 11 and 12 is your XLRs, and then 13, 14, and 15 and 16 is the two stereo channels. They're tip sleeve. They're actually unbalanced, and then you can pretty much have a choice. You can either you can use either one. You can either say use the mic gain for the XLRs or the stereo gain for those. So it has a separate ones there. You can either run it through the stereo channels through the channel strip here, which by this choice right here, if this button's out, it's going straight to the main left and right outs, and then the volume is pretty much your gain right here. And then if you have it in, then you can route it through the channel strip. The only thing right here is goes back to when you're playing music off a memory stick here, is that you can use, if this button is out, and let's see if I can get a closer view of this. If the button is out, it uses the stereo channels from this, uses 15 and 16, the tip sleeve. If you push this in, it's now routing the MP3s off your jump drive, and you can either tell it to go through this channel strip if this button's in, and if the button's out, it goes straight to the left and right buses. Now that's where if it's going to the left and right buses, you're really going to have to use the master faders a little bit. because now you're really not going to have a lot of control over the volume, which isn't a big deal. There actually is a gain adjustment right here internally. It's you have to jump through a couple different screens, but if you guys want me to look to cover that more, just let me know in the comments down below. There's quite a bit to learn on this mixer, but it's really not that hard when you sit down and take a look at the manual for like an hour or so. You really do glean a lot of good information on the functionality of this machine.